Hello, my name is Suresh. I'm co-founder and CTO of a company called CleverTap. Quick background of the company. We started out in 2013. Today, we operate out of 6 regions, including EU. We are about 200 people now in various locations, and we are backed by Axel Partners, Sequoia Capital, and Tiger Global. So our customers include typically the growth teams, sometimes product teams within consumer businesses. So what do we do? This is what we do. So please read the installs as newly acquired users. So when you talk about growth teams, sometimes the growth teams typically roll into marketing teams. But sometimes I've seen in some certain companies, they roll into the product teams. So how many of you here carry the KPIs related to user retention? Product teams, right? Other marketing teams? Marketing teams, yeah. So, actually I structured this presentation so we can talk about the problem, we can talk about the framework and the model in which we find solutions, and we can talk about the necessary infrastructure, and lastly we can cite some examples. I can showcase a few logos of our customers who deployed this solution at scale. So what are the problems here? So when you talk about these growth teams, they work on 2 different important problems. One is user acquisition and then user retention. The thing with the user acquisition is it's expensive. It costs anywhere between $5 to $10 per install. And the money goes down the drain if you do not work on user retention. And what's the problem in this? And besides, the user retention is cheaper, typically costs around 1/10 of the cost of acquisition, but it's harder. Acquisition is expensive, but it's easier. Just spend the money in the ad networks. The retention is harder, but cheaper. So what's the problem here? I haven't put the numbers, but you see this is a very depressing graph. You lose, if I just talk about this, you lose 70% of newly acquired users within 7 days. These are the actual numbers. This number is out there, it's a pretty popular number, it's out there in the market. We also noticed these numbers within our customer base. And what's worse, you lose 90% of them in the span of 90 days. So what to do about it? It's a very frustrating thing for these growth teams. And this problem, by the way, is called leaky bucket problem. It's frustrating because usually these guys have a lot of ideas. Unfortunately, they are iterative in nature. It takes a lot of time to get to that. It's more like it's mere science than an art. And what's even more frustrating is the struggle with lack of necessary infrastructure to deal with this problem. They have a lot of ideas, but they lack tools. So how do you solve for this? So I can talk about the framework and the model in which we can find solutions in this. For a given problem, of course, there are many ways of solving a problem. We have our model of solving it. So what's the model? It's effective engagement, providing delightful customer experience. Thematically, these are the two sub-areas. Sometimes it feels like one and the same. Use effective engagement to provide this delightful consumer experience with a subtle difference. The second aspect primarily concerns with the product team rather than the growth teams. I'll showcase how. So what is effective engagement? It boils down to creating these engagement hooks to deliver these contextually relevant experiences at appropriate moments via preferred touch points. So this is our model. How do we actually do it? We can talk about it in subsequent slides when I showcase what it takes technically to achieve this. Showcasing one example here, the contextually relevant experience here. This is like a smart fridge. You run out of your milk. The IoT with sensors, the IoT device figuring out and sending you the right message here. Notice this one aspect. In this context, the customer will be delighted. But this message slightly out of context is perceived as spam. So the context is very important. Second one. We all came from different parts of the world to attend this. I thought this would be a relevant example. Think of it like you have a very neck-tight schedule, and this unfortunate event, the flight is delayed. And as soon as you land, you realize there's no way you make to the meeting if you go to your hotel first. Think of it like this assistant app, triangulating this information that the flight is delayed and mapping to the traffic conditions, suggesting you to book 2 cabs, one for you to the meeting room and one to the hotel directly to disperse your luggage. And then you go straight to the meeting room, and then it checks in itself, providing you some sort of a digital key, and post your meeting, you go back to your hotel room, no need to check in, it's already checked in. You walk to your room, and the room ambience is tuned as per your taste, basis your previous visits and stuff. So now this is a very good experience, example of good experience here. The thing that we need to notice here, it's not just one app. It's not one company. It's multiple companies collaborating together to provide this seamless end-to-end experience in this particular case. So if you solve for good experience, people tend to remember it. What people tend to remember is the experience rather than just a service. Coming back to the models. Have you heard of this hierarchy of engagement? It's a very simple tool. In fact, very simplistic tool for any given business Actually, let me go back. It actually boils down to breaking down your larger goal into smaller milestones. So working towards the larger goal, you break down the problem into smaller milestones and solve for it. So this can be done irrespective of the verticals. Acknowledgement is the lowest strata of engagement. Interest is somewhere in the middle. And the conversion or the core action. The core action example, if you e-commerce, it's the purchase event. Or if it's some sort of a Spotify kind of a thing, it's like listening or adding to the playlist kind of an event, which is a core action. So you break it down and map your users. They fall in one of these. And then navigate them through these milestones towards your larger goal. You need infrastructure to do that. I'll talk about it in subsequent slides. But this is the model. Another such example, customer lifecycle management. Anyone of you heard about this? Used it? This is more granular. I kind of quite like this than the previous one, but that's easy to start in the previous one. So you map those milestones, like new users onboarded, first purchase can be a very good milestone. There are strategies out there to get the new users to do their first ever transaction. Second purchase is another milestone. These things are not easy job. Suppose it's fair to assume that there is top of the mind recall and the customers open the apps on their own when there is need. Once they get to the next stage, you kind of lock them in some sort of loyalty programs. Airlines do this really well. Kind of lock you in miles and stuff. And then comes a stage, sometimes, people just churn and then launch reactivate program for that. So it's not linear. People can jump from the stages. And once you do it effectively, you can improve those retention metrics depending on the business. How do you do it? This is good theory on paper, but what are the tools if you were to do it in your own business? How do you do that? These are the building blocks. So I talked about the model. The thesis was to have an effective engagement, which is right message, right time, and providing the delightful experiences. So it boils to, you see this who, what, when. Who do you engage with? What content do you engage with? And when? Also, what are the preferred touch points? With channels of communication? And it starts with profiling the customers. We call it Customer 360. You have to profile in terms of demographics, geography, technographics, behavioral data, their interests. If you know everything about the customer, then what's next that's required is very strong segmentation suite. You see the one below? So you need this ability to segment people on real-time basis. Why real-time? To preserve the context. You remember those examples? Slightly out of the context, it is perceived as spam. You run the risk of being perceived as spam. So, so remember, this is not a data warehousing use case where you run nightly jobs to build this segmentation list. There's a lot of context, there's a lot of real-time context that's required. And the second one is this so-called automation suite. So remember the previous slides, moving the customer, navigating them through the milestones. That's not going to happen manually. You need this strong. For example, this could be example of ideal onboarding, but you need to automate that. But what is ideal automation? So what is ideal onboarding workflow? You might know it because of the domain knowledge that you have. You've been in the industry for a while. Even in that case, so many micro patterns that emerge with the advent of data, which you should leverage. So how do you get into this ideal onboarding automation? This is just an example. Moving from onboarding, first transaction to second transaction, this automation workflow could be very different. In the previous slide here, a very well-known technique that is used to segment users to map to these stages, it's called RFM analysis. Heard about that? It's a classic technique. It's a recency frequency monetization analysis. You use that to kind of segment users into 10 different categories and then map into one of these life cycle stages. And use tools. And if you have necessary infrastructure, you can navigate customers from one stage to next stage. To do that, you need to have this automation suite. But the thing is, you get stuck into this loop. You need to optimize this who, what, when aspect while figuring out the automation flow. The only way is test, you experiment, you measure, you keep experimenting until you find the satisfactory result. Can I improve that? Of course. The data scientists play a significant role in optimizing this aspect. Basis the past data, it can lay out templates for ideal onboarding. If you have this, you can improve this loop. This is iterative in nature. There was a reason why I said it's more of a science than art. And then lastly, this collaborate. Remember the example? Multiple apps collaborating together to provide seamless experience. So these are the building blocks. This is all it takes to implement effective engagement. And in the process, delightful consumer experience. Thematically, this is how we can represent it. Focus on the left. You have customer database. You have processing capabilities, processing engine. You need capabilities to derive insights, capabilities to automate the workflows, deeper integrations into the communication channels, and on top, So it's engagement model. Here I picked the customer lifecycle management, but people can deploy their own models. Variant of them. On the right, it's just a technical requirement. This translates to stack like this. Adding scale to this, solving these problems at scale, it's complicated. You see these ugly looking silos? One of the major problems. Talking about customer 360, triangulating this information across data silos. Sometimes people think, oh, it's available inside. The AWS is answer for everything. In reality, cloud is just someone else's computer. You need to solve for it on your own. Showcasing the examples here. Good news is it works. I'll showcase a few more examples in terms of actually improving the engagement metrics or the retention metrics. So when I talk about scale, you see the numbers on the right. This is supposed to be the title of this presentation. It occupies this little space in the slide. 300 billion events, there's a new data that gets into your system every month, which is about 10 billion action points. That's a kind of scale. Just to give you perspective, number of Google searches a day is about 4 billion. And these many messages that are delivered across the channels. So the point here is solving these retention problems at scale is a challenge in itself. Some of the numbers. We have white papers on all this. So in case you want to get into details, I'm around, can discuss the actual engagement strategies, or I can have the white papers delivered to you guys. So Hotstar is a video streaming app. The traffic hits north during this Indian Premier League or some of these important matches. It telecasts cricket matches, other sports, and other shows and stuff. It operates at immense scale. Gojek, this is the Uber of Southeast Asia. Operating in areas like Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, places. Because of the virtue of population, the scale is immense. So deploying these solutions at scale, these guys have done it. And these are the actual numbers. Dream11, it's a fantasy gaming app. People make a lot of money playing with these virtual teams. Again, comes from India, virtue of population, a lot of scale. Based out of US, it's a ticketing app. You can book movie tickets and stuff. So these are real examples. So they deploy those models that we discussed, a variant of them, tuned to their business cases to achieve these numbers. That's all I have. Any questions? So most of the time, it boils down to articulating the problem. The point I made at the beginning of the presentation, explaining the leaky bucket syndrome. It's easy in our case because, on one hand, people spend a lot of money acquiring users, and they see the money going down the drain. So it's a pinching problem for them. So showcasing the worked out examples, white papers. The good news is, since we operate in the SaaS environment, building solutions, basically if you have verticalized solutions, others can just relate to them and deploy those solutions. So the categories are ride-hailing, video streaming, e-commerce. So all the categories are kind of covered. I talked about the number of customers we have there, about 8,000, pretty much covered all the verticals. So you build use cases, you showcase the value, the people just buy it. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.